Hi there, welcome everyone again to this series with leaders I love, and I am so delighted to have with me here today Sarb Johal, who, much like many of the others that I have been speaking with, I didn't know of and have just heard of and connected with through this time because of his incredible content that he has been sharing, which we will talk about. But first, just a little bit about you, Sarb. So you are a psychologist with 27 odd years of experience on the back of 2 doctoral degrees. Is that right?
Yeah, I've done a lot of school. Yeah, I did first. I'm actually a university dropout. I actually went to university to start off with, doing business economics and accounting,
Wow.
and I hated it. I really hated it. They basically said, "Here's a lot of books. We'll test you on it in 3 years," which was fine, but it's not really what I thought university should be about. So I ended up doing psychology as a bit of a kind of like a minor subject, and just got totally engrossed with that. So I decided that it was too late to drop out and start again in that university. So I took the rest of the year off doing various different jobs, including searching planes for drugs and bombs, and then working in a hospital testing poos and wees. And then I, started again at university. And haven't looked back. That's what I've been doing, being a psychologist.
Do you know what? If I had my time again at university, I did a Bachelor of Commerce in Marketing and Management. If I had my time again, I would so absolutely do psychology and neuroscience. It just fascinates me. So I'm so excited to talk with you today and interested to hear that for the last 7 or so years, you've been focused on the provision of psychosocial support for those affected by disasters in New Zealand, and also been advising on a global scale through the World Health Organization and UN. So that's massive, and what a fantastic platform for where we are now, which is obviously this pandemic that we are calling COVID-19, within which you have been so prolific with the content you've produced and the support you've provided. So thank you for what you've been doing, and thank you for being here to talk with me today.
That's very kind of you to say so. And thank you for the invitation. It's been, I think it's been a very odd testing time for lots of people, and people have ended up doing things that they didn't think and didn't plan and didn't imagine themselves doing over the last few weeks. And we're at a point now where, again, people are perhaps reassessing, how is it that they get their basic needs met, which is really, really important. And that's the platform upon which you can do anything else, really. So I feel privileged to be able to be here with you today, in a position where we've kind of managed to get through that initial period, and we are actively trying to figure out the way forward. So yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation. Thank you, Tony.
So that period that you talked about that we have got through and we have navigated our way through, during that period, you committed to producing one health and wellbeing video every day throughout the entire lockdown, it's a big commitment. And so I'd love to know what drove you to do that, and also how that process helped you personally through lockdown.
Yeah. I guess, it was a big commitment. And I remember thinking about it at the time and thinking, I don't actually know when this is going to end. I thought it probably wasn't going to be much longer than 4 weeks. And that was kind of like where we were going to start off from. And in my mind, I was thinking, probably about 4 weeks, maybe a little bit more, if we can do this right. And then I got to thinking, how are we going to do this right? And where are people going to be struggling? And where are people going to be fine? And how can I support people to do more of what they're fine with, and introduce variety in terms of what they're fine with? Because often, we're okay for a while and we kind of run out of ideas and it starts to feel a bit stale. So I thought, okay, well, that's one thing that I can do, is to perhaps draw from what it is that I'm seeing on the internet and act as a bit of a focal point and something that can reference and help to spread the good news of what people are doing so that other people get ideas too. And then, of course, there's my background as a psychologist, as somebody who's been working in emergency management, psychosocial support, psychology, society in emergency since 2006 in New Zealand, and then, as you said, back in the UK, which is where I'm originally from, and then also in the WHO system as well. And so I was thinking, okay, so there's all that knowledge and skills that I've got locked up in here that I've been talking about to various audiences, but how do I how do I communicate that so that people can find it useful and usable? And so on the side, in a completely different world of mine, I have a channel on YouTube, which is all about mobile video.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been doing that for about 1.5 years. And I thought, wow, okay, I have a psychology channel. I don't really use it that much, but maybe this is an opportunity to use what I've learned in terms of communication and making short videos, and then applying what it is that I know and putting that out in little bites so that people can get some perhaps helpful tips or knowledge or understanding, orientation around why is it that you perhaps are feeling this or thinking this, some explanation, and then also something at the end where they can actually use something in their own lives to help better understand, or to help their children to understand, or their partners to understand, or their communities to understand, and then take some step forwards. Because just to develop some momentum to help you to get through on a daily basis, you know, just that motion is really, really helpful in terms of your understanding and your processing of what's going on for you. If you can feel like there's some kind of motion for you personally, even if it feels like the whole world is standing still, and for some people that felt great, and for other people that felt really disturbing for them. And so I guess for me, it was about understanding that there was going to be a range of experience that was going to be out there that people were going to be going through, understanding that I have knowledge and skills, understanding that my passion is around public mental health, and then trying to figure out how that all lines up. And so my motivation was, okay, so if my commitment to purpose is around public mental health and around communicating, I think it would be useful for me to make something available on a daily basis. And so that helped me to structure my own days, and also helped me to, if I'm left to my own devices, I can be on my device, right? I can be checking for news like the whole time. And so I thought, okay, so I'm going to be doing that quite intentionally now. So I will spend maybe an hour in the morning and just trying to figure out what are people thinking about now? What are people talking about? And then I'll maybe come up with some ideas around what it is that I think might be useful over the next 2 or 3 days. And then I'll go in again in the afternoon. I'll just kind of validate what it is that I'm seeing, what it is that people are thinking about. And then maybe I'll talk to some people around, you know, I'm noticing this. Does that sound right to you? Is that what you're experiencing? Is that what you're hearing other people experiencing? So it's a process of all of that, trying to be helpful, but also trying to manage my own self as well. And so that I could feel like I was being productive, but also managing my own hive mind, which goes around and collecting information like a magpie, and so I can channel it some way.
Yeah, that completely makes sense to me. I think I did something similar, but with a different purpose or in a different way, in that the content that I've been producing, also videos and live meditations, things like that, I haven't structured my day around it. More so, I might have had a feeling or an experience, and I think, you know what, I actually need to process through that. I imagine other people do too. So, for example, today, as we're recording this, I'm thinking it's definitely been an energy shift for me this week. I'm going to do an Instagram live on this tonight, and I haven't actually prepared it. For me, it's kind of moving through it. But like you, it gives me a channel through which to process and through which to communicate. So I understand that. And you know, you talked about looking at what and listening to what people have been talking about this day and at the moment in order to fuel your content production. Of course, the word or the phrase that we have heard the most is lockdown. And to me, that word conjures up prison and restraint and constraint and being closed in. And so right on day one, I think it was way back at the beginning, I said to my daughters, who are 7 and 8, you know, you'll hear this word around, but I like to think of it as a home retreat, because we're retreating from school, we're retreating from work, and it changed our whole perspective and our whole experience of that lockdown. So whilst we might have been closed in physically, of course, what does language like that do to our psyche? And I'd love to know what language you've been using in your home.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting point. It's a really, really interesting question. And I guess I was mindful of it when it first started being used. I'll give you another example, and then we'll come back to lockdown. And that's the difference between social distancing and physical distancing. And so right at the very beginning, I was strongly advocating not to use social distancing in New Zealand and for us to use as much as possible physical distancing. And I think to some extent, to a large extent, I think that was successful. I think many, many people kind of all caught onto this at the same time and saying, actually, one of the biggest things that gets us through, one of the most important factors that gets us through a crisis or an emergency is social connection. So we don't want to confound, we don't want to mix up the idea of social connection with distancing. So let's use a completely different term, because actually what we're doing here is we want to be staying 2 meters apart from people, but we want to be staying socially connected in digitally healthy ways, if that's what you're going to do, or talking far enough from each other and not spending too long in each other's company. That's what the guidance was, right? So to a certain extent, I felt like we've managed to do this. And it felt like my attention got to lockdown perhaps a little bit too late in the piece, and it already had become embedded. And I thought, well, you kind of got to pick your battles in terms of like the public narrative. And I think it was helpful in some respects, because it was kind of internationally being used and everybody kind of knew what we were talking about. But personally, when I thought about it, and it sounds odd, I think really quite visually, and I think my family know this, and I'm saying this out loud now, I think a lot in cartoons. That's just how I do. That's just how I think. And when I think about lockdown, I wasn't thinking about a place. I was actually thinking about a suitcase in my head. And in a suitcase, you kind of like, you lock it and you secure it. And it stops things from springing out, is the first thing, and then just going all over the place in a kind of like chaotic way. But it also protects what's inside from the outside. And so I guess when I was thinking about that and I was kind of like trying to deconstruct that, I think it's more about security than it is around locking down. It's about securing the things on the inside so that they're safe from the stuff on the outside. But it's also containing. And I think that that's one of the things that we were thinking about as well here in this house, is that actually being in our house and being in our home acted like a safe space and a safe container against everything else that was kind of like going on the outside. And yeah, we paid attention to it and it was useful for us to know what was going on the outside. But when we came from the outside, we all washed our hands. We all kind of like went through a little bit of almost like a little bit of a ritual in terms of like, that's the outside world and here we are in the inside world. And this is a safe space for us to be right now. So I guess that's where we settled on terms of thinking about that. But it's interesting, right, in terms of what the knock-on consequences of that are now. You know, we're noticing, you know, this is our 2-year-old's first half day at kindy today, and she's taken to it straight away. She was like, fine, she's a bit tired now, and she's probably trying to go to sleep upstairs with my wife now. But what we have noticed also is that our 9-month-old now is now really not happy about being around strangers. Because for the last 2 months, all she's seen is us. And before that, she was like really, really social. Now, you know, I trained as a child clinical psychologist, and I know that, you know, around about this age, babies tend to get a little bit funny, and I've got 2 older kids around sort of strangers, but she seems to be going through that in an amplified way at the moment. And I know it will calm down, but I also wonder what that feels like for not just 9 months old, but for everybody re-entering from lockdown, but what I thought was actually quite a secure space, into something that now feels perhaps a little less controlled, perhaps a little bit less secure. And so we're all paying attention, I think, now in a different way to the world and to how it is that we're exposing ourselves to other people. And I've noticed that myself too. I went to a cafe for the first time with my 9-year-old daughter on Friday afternoon. We decided not to go on Thursday because we thought we'd just be too busy, but it felt quite surreal to us both. So we both just kind of sat there looking at each other, just going, there's not many people in here and we're all kind of spaced apart. And is this how it's going to be from now on? So yeah, there's all that predictability that we have around the outside world, but now we find ourselves perhaps internally feeling a little bit like, what's my radar? Does this feel right? I'm not really sure.
And I think that talks completely to another term that we are all hearing a lot, which is the new normal, because we are going back to or forward into, you know, I don't want to say a whole new world. It's not like everything's changed, but there are differences, you know, and you can see some of those differences or you can sense some of those differences. And yeah, I have a little thing about new normal as well, because I feel like it implies that we need to find normality or we need to norm. And of course, there's a certain amount of that that is required. But I just always think to myself, we are all so beautifully unique. And the work or the practice that I have requires or involves my training and my work as a Gallup strengths coach. I don't know if you know much about the Gallup organisation, but as a psychologist, I'm sure you do. They've been around for 40 odd years, and through all of that time in their research, what they've done is looked at the human psyche, looked at personality, and basically kind of distilled all of our natural human talents into 34 talent themes. So absolutely not labels or categories, but themes. And because there are so many, 34, if you do your assessment, your top 5 Gallup strengths assessment, it will ultimately spit out your top 5 in sequenced order. And there's a 1 in 33 million chance that someone else will have the same top 5 in the same order as you. So we know we're all unique, but I just find that statistic incredibly powerful and compelling, and I think it represents or is a reflection of the fact that we are more than our DNA. We're a product of our DNA, our epidemiology, our environment, and our moment-to-moment experiences. And I just fear, with using the word new normal and normality, if you like, that we might lose this incredible opportunity to explore the adaptability, the innovation, and the ideation that we've seen over these last few weeks. And also, I'd add to that, the amplification of respect for other people's circumstances and needs, which I do think we've seen a lot of. So I know that's a lot that I've just shared, but what are your thoughts on that?
I'll let you into a secret. I detest the term the new normal. And I've pushed back against it ever since 2010, 2011, when the phrase was doing the rounds in the Canterbury earthquake recovery. I think it implies, well, I can understand why people use it. And I think it speaks to our need for predictability and certainty in times of flux and in times where things are changing at a rapid rate. We're looking for a platform upon which we can say, okay, this is how it's going to be for a while, and therefore we can plan with some certainty around what it is that we're going to do, what's important, what activities are necessary, and then we can settle. And I think that that is an understandable human drive. I also don't have a lot of time for the concept of personality either. And I think that, again, it speaks to a need that we have in order to make sense of our behavior over time. But if we think about personality, actually what we're doing is we are looking at our past and we are trying to establish a narrative that makes sense of our behavior over a long period of time and then predicts what it is that we might do in the future. And it enables us to describe, oh, I'm an extroverted person, or I'm an ambivert, or I don't like this and I do like that, right? So it's shorthand for us to be able to explain a situation, or in terms of the new normal, or personality in terms of me or another person. But what we have to remember is that this is all about predictability and certainty for us. Because I'm sure that I've changed. And I'm sure that I come up to situations all the time where I do something and then I find myself trying to wonder, why on earth did I just do that? Because if I'm this sort of a person, then this doesn't fit. So then I'll come up with some kind of rational explanation, which then enables me to fit my behavior into this narrative of what kind of a person that I am. And in terms of the new normal, I think that if we think about what resilience is, and we think about some of the definitions of that, resilience is about positively adapting to changed circumstances. And it's not an end point, it's a process. And that process is continuing. It's kind of like living. You don't have the new life. You're living, and you're constantly living, and you're constantly adapting to a situation as it arises. And I think you're right. I think the danger is that we are looking for stasis. And the danger is that we almost like pickle the life that we find ourselves in our desire for solidity and a platform. And the danger is that all the inequalities that were there in the past, that we have now had our attention focused onto, or new inequalities, or new threats or dangers or dilemmas that people find themselves in, if we're not careful, then these become locked in or locked down, if we go back to our previous conversation. And actually what we're trying to do here is to provide security for people, such that they are then able to then move forward into that unpredictability and uncertainty. Because we're moving from a world where we were kind of like, okay, so New Zealand's all about tourism, New Zealand's all about food, selling it to other people, it's all about selling value to other places. And it's all about, we're a highly mobile group of people, and lots of people come here too. A lot of that has changed and will be like that for a while. And in trying to find some certainty, I think you're right. I think that there is a danger in kind of locking things down into this like new normal, and then having to go through all this again if circumstances change. Because although we want to have stability and for things to slow down a bit for a wee while, we also have to keep in mind that things may change again quickly, and we may have to pivot again nimbly. And so being able to support people in that understanding that things are unpredictable and it feels discomforting, and recognizing that perhaps calling things the new normal might work in the short term, but actually what you need to do is to deal with the discomfort. And that's the basic security of living, that calling it a new normal isn't necessarily going to address. And that's the gap for me.
Yeah. God, there's so much there that you said that I agree with. And I love that you talked about personality and it, you know, fixing us or categorizing or labeling us as something, because, you know, I can talk to that from my experience on the Myers-Briggs. I'm, you know, massively extrovert on the, you know, the end of the extroversion scale. However, through these last few weeks, through my home retreat, I really absolutely loved not seeing people and not having to be out there socializing with people. And when we got the news that we were going to be moving into level 2, to be honest, my response was, oh no, I just want to cocoon for longer. So if you had said, oh, well, she's an extrovert, so she's going to be really keen to get back out there, that would have locked me into a particular personality type or category, which actually I wasn't experiencing. So I think it's so important that we recognize, as you say, that we are ever evolving beings, and, you know, circumstances are continually changing around us. And you're so right, it's about having not just resilience, I think, but emotional agility. And I do find that it's really helpful to understand my strengths, my natural talents, which are not labels at all, because I know that one of those is harmony, for example. So I can help other people and help myself to find a sense of harmony and equanimity in this time. That doesn't label me, it's a talent, and it allows me to play into that. So I think you're right, you know, there are lots of nuances around words like personality, talent, things like that. There's a lot of gold in what you just said. And you mentioned the word stability. I think that's really key. And what I've noticed and what I've done myself over the last few weeks is really start to explore and connect to or reconnect to my values. And I know a lot of other people have done this. I've asked a lot of the people that I've spoken to what values they've connected to or what beliefs they've connected to that have fortified them and provided that sense of stability, and also to a certain extent allowed them to define and uphold boundaries in this time. So I'd love to know from you what values you have connected to that have helped you to stay calm amid the chaos around us, and also any new boundaries that you have put in place.
Yeah, and I guess I was reflecting upon that myself as we sort of started coming out of level 4 and then into level 3 of the alert system that we have, which again I think was really containing. It enables you to see, well, okay, this is the threat, this is the danger, and these are the actions that are tied to it. And so it enables you to really make that very, very clear link. And I think it was very helpful for us to have that established very early on, because for me that enabled stability. And I think stability was one of the core things that I was thinking about. So I come from a family. My parents grew up in what is now Pakistan and is now India. They went through the Great Partition of India. They were refugees and lived as refugees in India. And then they migrated to the UK later on in their lives. And so I guess this didn't really become apparent to me until later on in my life, in that I moved 18 times in 9 years when I was doing all that schooling, when I was back in the UK. So, and at the end of all of that, I was just sick of it. I just couldn't do it anymore. And now I find moving house the most terrible thing. I absolutely hate it. It's one of the worst things that I can think about doing. So stability becomes a really, really important thing for me. And so I think that one of the things was trying to manage that. And so I think structure was a really, really important thing for me. And I know from my clinical training is that really the balance between structure and empathy is really important when people are going through the discomfort of uncertainty. So understanding that you, even in uncertain times, can build a structure to your day, or a structure to parts of your day that then become your anchor point. They become your islands in rising seas where you can firmly plant your feet and be confident that you have a stable base, even though all around you can't see land. The map that you had, that was your chart by which you navigated these lands, is useless, but your feet are still on firm ground. So that structure, that ability to have that stability became really important to me, and my understanding is important to other people too. But then on the other side of that, I think the other thing is like not to go too quickly to the problem solver. When people come to you or people come to government and they have a request either for assistance financially, or they need information, or they need to figure out what's going on with their health or health of a loved one, often it's not the information that's the sole part of the request. The other part of that request is a relationship. It's about hearing. It's about being listened to. And so I think the other part of the thing that I remember talking to my wife about on the night before we went to alert level 4, I said, if I ever get this, I want you to remind me of 2 words. I want you to remind me of structure, and I want you to remind me of empathy. Because I think that that's the really big balancing point of stopping people from going to, okay, you need to do this, 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 and this, and this. Often it's not what people want. I want you. And so that is what I was really trying to return to, I think, most times when I was going through that period, and for the whole family too.
Yeah, stability is key, and especially for those of us who have teens, it's about providing stability for them, and also those of us who have children. And I totally get that balance between structure and empathy. And I guess, I talked earlier about my days not being too structured. For me, if I think about and reflect right now on that, that was me directing empathy inwards towards myself and allowing myself to express my emotions and have that flow in the moment or whenever I needed it, which in a way provided structure, but it is absolutely about having that balance. And I love how you talked about a little metaphor there around, the ocean, navigating our path and having our feet planted firmly on the ground. For me, one of the boundaries, and I call it a boundary, but I suppose in a way it's also structuring my re-emergence. One of the things that I've put in place is carving out time after dropping the kids off to school to get to the beach and plant my feet on the beach and just have a walk in the fresh air so that I can anchor myself into my day. So I drop the kids off, I know that they are safe, and then I anchor myself into my body, into my day, so that when I get back home, I can be really productive and really effective. And I call it a boundary. I suppose my boundary there is that I'm not going to be accepting clients or work in that hour between drop off and an hour after that. And I suppose you're right. What that is doing is giving me structure and anchoring me into my day. I think, though, sometimes we need permission to establish boundaries and to say no to others. One thing that I wrote in my book, which I published a few years back, is saying no to others is saying yes to you. And I really believe that people often need permission to be able to do that. So my question to you here is, for those people who are feeling anxious about re-emerging into the world, so perhaps they do have new values they'll be publicly stepping into for the first time, or new boundaries that they want to uphold and are fearful that they might not be respected, or there is just simply an anxiousness about the uncertainty and a sense of instability. What advice can you give them?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this, and I guess that I want to just talk a little bit about the three sort of systems that we have internally that help us to manage our lives, our uncertainties in the world. The first one we've already talked about, right? It's the value system. It's your drive system. It's your motivational system. It's what sets you on your path and it keeps you going, because the way that you're aligned to your values then becomes your motivation. The other two are the sort of the accelerator system that we have, which is the sympathetic nervous system. It's the fight, flight, or freeze reaction that we have. And then there's the calming system. Okay, so this is where the belly breathing, the meditation, be able to slow down. Now, the interesting thing is that you can't use the accelerator and the brake at the same time, right? So if you've got your foot on the brake, the accelerator doesn't work. So if we get really, really skilled at putting our foot on the brake, then no matter what we're revving, we can probably feel the brake making a difference. We can hear it revving, but maybe it's not making such a difference, but we still know where we want to be heading. Yeah. Now, when we start to say no to other people in the world, although it may feel like we're supposed to be putting the brake on and we're supposed to be actually calming things down, for many people who that feels quite threatening, actually, it has what we're doing is we're hitting the accelerator, because that feels quite threatening to say no in an external environment, particularly when we're trying to perhaps reorient ourselves to a new set of values through which we may have learned or have been revealed to us in the last week. Wow, actually this is important to me, and perhaps I didn't realize, or I'm reconnecting with this importance in my life. And so I want to start reshaping what my life looks like, which means I'm going to have to start saying yes to some things, but also no to other things. So saying no can actually rev up all of your fight, flight, freeze reactions. So what we need then to be able to do is to be able to go to our other two systems and say, actually returning back to my values, then actually, yes, this is really, really important to me. But then there are costs and there are consequences of a life lived in alignment with these values that I've rediscovered, reawakened, or discovered for the first time. And then understanding how we use our brake system in order to help us to soothe and manage what's coming up for us when we're saying no. And we need to get, I guess, imaginative around amplifying and doing the things that have worked for us in the past, but then really being quite skilled and magpie-like, again, stealing from the best, stealing from the artists around, well, what actually works for other people, perhaps I could try that for me, and learning from other leaders who are perhaps stepping into these uncertain spaces where they're saying no. I've had to say no to a lot of things in the last couple of weeks because I've been asking myself, one of the things that I really am valuing now, after the last year and a half where I've been spending quite a lot of time as a stay-at-home dad, is time. And I'm getting drawn more and more and more into work, which is really good and valuable, and I like it, and it hits other bits of my purpose, but it's taking away from another sphere of my life. And trying to find that balance is difficult because, you know, we've got bills to pay and all that kind of stuff that we need to be worrying about, the practical side of life. So I think that as people are trying to figure out that saying no is important, I guess my heads up would be there will be consequences. Prepare yourself for those consequences, but not just in terms of internally, but what are other people going to say when you say no? Because often it's the system of other people who hear the no that try to keep you in the place where you were before. And so understanding that system and how it is that you're going to be able to talk to the system when your word no is maybe to one person, then helps you to perhaps get a clue as to where it is that you need to also say no, or yes but perhaps is another way of framing a no.
So true. And that's one that I use as well, the yes but. And often I'll say, yes, I can do that next week or next month, you know, and then I give them, you know, a time frame in terms of it's a yes, but it's just not a yes right now. And then I'll often say to them, because for me right now, what's really important is da 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 da. And then often woven in there just naturally is a particular value or, you know, something that's really important to me. And, you know, I think that's it. I think it's about communicating. You talked earlier about people wanting relationship. And I think, you know, in this time where there is still so much uncertainty, one of the best things we can do, aside from and in addition to, you know, knowing our own system and keeping ourselves in that balance of equanimity between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, is to communicate. And that is communicating to ourselves on how we're feeling and how we are, but also communicating to others on how we are, but also what we need. So I think that's key. Now, last question, which is really about you, because part of this series is about getting to the heart of leaders I love who are showing up with so much inspiration and so much authenticity and, you know, so much fantastic advice. And as you said earlier, advice that is useful and usable. I love that phrase. One thing I'd love to ask you is, what is one thing that you personally have been doing every day to live strong and to ease any fears and anxieties of your own?
Sure. I think I was quite intentional about this because I think I found myself very early on listening to a lot of serious stuff all the time, watching a lot of serious stuff, reading a lot of serious stuff, which is completely understandable. But I guess what I wanted to do, particularly as I was preparing to go to bed or heading back into kind of like more family time rather than work time, was I needed to quite intentionally switch my mood and switch my mind as to where it was going to be focused. And the way that I do that is through two things. Number one is music. So the music I listen to has a deep impact on the mood and where my mind is at. And so that's important. But I think even more important than that was actually laughter and understanding that actually that was a really, really good way to get me into a different mindset. Now, I'm a sort of person who, when I'm quite tired, I can get quite absurd. And so my family do maybe laugh at me with some of the stuff that I come out with, which is completely different to perhaps what other people see from me. I can get very, very loose with the connections that I have in my brain. But then also we try to listen to, you know, or watch a comedy thing before we go to bed in the evening. So it might be a film, or it might be a little sitcom or something like that. Or I listen to funnier or lighter podcasts because I get a little bit sick of news, and politics is the last thing I need to be listening to in the hour before I go to bed. So I'll try to listen to something much lighter. And then one of the things that we were doing as an exercise in our family was like, you know, what are the things that we value? What are we grateful for? And what are the things that we're going to kind of park? And we're going to say, yes, I'm really, really missing doing this. And then when we're able to, this is something that we're going to do. but what are the sorts of things also that we're going to try and do every day? And one of those was to make people laugh for me, because in order to make people laugh, I would have to sit down and think about, right, what are they going to find funny, and how am I going to be able to just crack a grin out of them at this time where they really don't feel like laughing anymore. So it's almost like a little bit of a challenge for me. So I guess that's the relational part of it in terms of how I was thinking about this and using it, and something that we could share. But for me, my own self, it was music and laughter, I think, were the things that were really important for me to be able to get through thinking quite seriously about things as is appropriate at the time.
I love that, because it's so simple and it's free, isn't it? You know, making someone laugh or laughing at something else, it doesn't cost us anything, and it instantly releases those endorphins and just makes us feel so much lighter and more buoyant. And certainly, you know, I can attest to the fact that you absolutely have done that, because the first time I watched one of your videos that you'd produced through these last few weeks, you know, you're speaking at the beginning and I'm leaning in and listening, and then there's this clip of, I don't know if it was the Smurfs or some cartoon or other, and it was completely unexpected, and it instantly put a smile on my face. So you really have done that, and I love that, because it's so unexpected and so different, and it really does bring levity in this time where, you know, it is hard. I've had days where I've raged and been angry. I've had days where I've, you know, been in tears, and levity and buoyancy, I think, is just so important. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. It is so simple yet so powerful.
And I, you know, I've had some feedback from some people saying that they thought I was being flippant, and that really wasn't my intention. And in fact, the psychology behind it is that actually when we can lighten mood and just get people kind of engaged in a different way, then they're much more able to take on new information. And that was my goal. And my goal was definitely not to make people enraged or irritated, because then that's actually going to close them off to any kind of message that I have. So I guess it's going to work for some people and not for others. And my particular type of humor, I think perhaps maybe work for you, and for other people it's not going to. But I think as a principle, in terms of what you're trying to do actually, is to get a relationship set up with people, which is difficult over the screen, such that they are open and feeling open to whatever message that you're trying to communicate. And I guess that's the principle behind it for me.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what you say there goes across, you know, every industry and every person, which is that, you know, we are not for everyone. Our content and what we produce is not for everyone. And that's because we're all different. And that is the beauty of life and the beauty of humanity. But certainly I know that you are helping a great many people with your content. And, you know, even just this last, you know, 40 minutes or so, there's so much gold in here. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm very grateful, and it's been fantastic to talk with you.
Oh, it's very humbling for you to ask me to be on here, Tui, and I really, really appreciate. Thank you, and thank you for the work that you're doing too. I think it's really important that you're visiting and talking with all these people and trying to draw this information together, because I think there's gold in all of these. So thank you again.
You're so welcome. Have a wonderful day. I hope your 2-year-old and your 9-month-old has gone to sleep, and you have a lovely.
It's all quiet. It's all quiet up there. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Fantastic. See you soon.
Kia ora. Thank you.